whether they realise it or not, interact in the world based on a range of assumptions, biases, and ideologies. So acknowledging our own assumptions, biases, and ideologies is important when it comes to understanding and leading others. We asked leaders in development about how they successfully work alongside those who see the world differently to them.
In relation to ideology and international development, it's true that you get a lot of people involved in international development who are highly motivated by ideologies. I guess my opinion is if you are coming from a third country into a sovereign state, you need to leave your ideology at the door and you need to try and understand what the context in that particular state is, what the interests of the people are, and work out how you're going to be able to enable them to achieve the sorts of things that they're interested in. Having said that, it's not that there aren't a lot of ideological people in all of the countries that we work in. And probably one of the examples where I've worked quite closely with people with really strong ideologies is the Indonesia Women's Empowerment Program, known as MAMPU. And that's a really innovative program where the Australian government's actually set up a program to find groups who are working on critical women's empowerment issues, whether it's women's health or women's economic development or, female-headed households or women's political participation. So you're actually working with activists to enable and extend their work to be more effective advocates for the critical women's issues that both governments are interested in advancing. But of course, people who are activists tend to be anti-government, or at least have different points of view to government, and are not necessarily compliant even if you've got a grant agreement with them. So, one of the challenges with working on that program was first to gain the trust of the women's groups who are the activists around these issues, for them to break down some of the suspicion, because in effect we're a government contractor supporting them, and show through understanding what they're trying to do and supporting and enabling them to do it better, more effectively. We were able on that program to establish good, solid relationships between our team and the women's activists, for them to understand the Australian and Indonesian government positions and at least not be hostile towards them, and support them to extend and advance their programs.
People working in development often have very strongly held views, and some of those views are heavily informed by their own lived experience. And it's particularly important for people working in development to understand that ideological context. And so, by way of example, people working in development may have a particular ideological view around the role of the private sector in development. And at the same time, that may, if you like, skew or impact the way they go about their work. So to give an example, a number of years ago, I worked for a non-government development agency, and we formed an international partnership with Starbucks, the global coffee chain. And the basis of that partnership was for Starbucks to work with the development agency, of which I was a director, to enhance the livelihoods of coffee producers in a range of developing countries around the world. A number of staff of that organisation initially were very strongly opposed to that partnership, and it was important for me to understand the reasons behind the opposition to that partnership. And so we had a range of discussions and forums in which people had an opportunity to express their views. And what was particularly interesting in those forums was that the basis of people's opposition to that partnership was very ideological, in the sense that at the time Starbucks was seen as an American-based multinational. It had an aggressive expansion strategy, which was forcing out small coffee shops from, if you like, sort of shopping precincts in Europe, in the US, and in Australia. And so the opposition was very ideologically based. And when we analysed that, the interesting conversation that emerged was that if you looked at the Starbucks business model, in fact, the company was going to do arguably a significant more benefit for small-scale coffee producers in developing countries, because they were, by and large, the world's largest producer of fair trade supply coffee. They were the largest investor in coffee cooperatives in developing countries. And once people understood, if you like, the sort of ideological bias that was underpinning their opposition to that partnership, and in fact the transformative change that this partnership could achieve for the beneficiaries of the organisation's work, then that led to a significant change of thinking within the organisation. So that's one particular example of being conscious of, if you like, ideological predispositions based on your own experience and views in your context.
Since 2 years ago, our organization and they focus on rejecting using of pesticide and chemical fertilizer. So we found a different approach in the field, and we try to encourage them to focus on helping farmer rather than bring their ideology. It was very difficult because, you know, they come from the activists, they have no farming background at all. So it was very difficult for our project in the field. But gradually we involve farmer on the meeting, on the workshop, and bring them together, the activists and farmer, so that they can talk each other, and then they come with a solution. So we bring the ideological people to the mud, to working together with farmer in their farming. And we found that after 4 years, it takes a long of time to what you call brainwashing or something, so that finally they can work together to solve the farmer problem.